They say you learn who your family truly is when the money shows up. I never believed that, not really. Not until the day I sat in a mahogany paneled office, surrounded by the people I raised, and realized I'd raised strangers. The room smelled of polished wood and new beginnings, and the air felt too clean, too rehearsed. My husband, Charles, had been gone for just 3 months. I was still learning how to walk through the house without hearing his slippers drag on the tile. Grief had made my world smaller, quieter. But that morning, everything suddenly became sharp again. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes," he said kindly, "thank you for being here." My daughter, Caroline, sat to my right, composed, perfumed, perfect, with a pearl necklace she'd bought herself the day after her father's funeral. My son, David, was on my left, restless as always, tapping his pen against the folder in front of him. Both looked too calm for people about to divide $30 million. Charles had built that fortune slowly, brick by brick, contract by contract, always saying, "We're not rich, Ellie, we're secure." I never cared for the number. I cared for the man who used to kiss my hand before every business trip, the man who left notes in my coat pockets in the winter saying, "You keep me warm even when I'm gone." But that man was gone now, and all that was left of him was ink on paper. The lawyer began reading. His voice was even, professional, the kind that had said these words too many times to count. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor," he read, "I leave my most important possession, the one thing that defined my life." He paused. I smiled faintly, expecting him to say our home or maybe the company shares. But instead, he said, "It will be delivered to her in a separate envelope." I blinked. "A separate envelope?" The lawyer nodded, gently pushing a small brown packet toward me, thin, unsealed, with dust along the edges like it had been waiting a while. Caroline leaned in slightly, curiosity bright in her eyes. David didn't even look up. He was already flipping through the section about Hayes Industries, the family company that had now become theirs. The rest of the will was short, clinical. Charles had left the business, the properties, and nearly every cent to our children. "They'll carry on his legacy," the lawyer said, smiling as if that were comforting. When he finished, Caroline stood and hugged me lightly. "Mom," she said in that cheerful tone she used when talking to clients, "this is what Dad wanted. You'll be taken care of." I nodded slowly, still staring at the dusty envelope. David clapped the lawyer on the shoulder. "We'll handle everything," he said. "We'll make Dad proud." When they left, the lawyer lingered. "Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly, "your husband instructed me not to explain anything. He said you'd understand once you opened it." I looked down at the brown envelope. My name was written across the front in Charles's handwriting, steady, looping, and familiar enough to make my throat tighten. "Thank you," I said softly. He smiled with something that looked almost like pity. "He loved you very much, ma'am." I drove home in silence, the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. I couldn't even bring myself to turn on the radio. The world felt louder than it needed to be. And that envelope, so small, so fragile, carried a weight I didn't yet understand. The house looked the same when I pulled in. The shutters Charles had painted last spring, the rosebush he used to trim every Sunday, the front porch that still creaked where he'd missed a nail. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the packet. My most important possession. What could that possibly mean? I brushed the dust away, opened the flap, and pulled out a single folded letter and a smaller envelope inside. The smaller one was sealed with red wax. My husband had never been sentimental, but he'd loved old-fashioned things. I smiled faintly despite myself. The letter on top was short, written in his careful, deliberate hand. "Ellie, if you're reading this, it means I've gone home before you. The children will have everything they think they want: money, property, power. But this envelope holds what they'll need someday. You'll know when to open it. Love, Charles." My fingers trembled. I turned the smaller envelope over, half expecting it to be heavy, filled with jewelry or maybe a key. But it was almost weightless. On the back were 4 words: "For when it hurts most." I pressed it to my chest, closed my eyes, and breathed in the faint scent of his cologne still clinging to the paper. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because at that moment the hurt was still too fresh to understand what he meant. For the next few days, I tried to act normal. Caroline and David were busy moving assets, selling the lake house, making big plans. They called, of course, but it was always in passing. "Mom, don't worry, you'll have an allowance," Caroline would say. David texted once, "Everything's being handled. Love you." But I didn't feel loved. I felt managed. And that envelope, that tiny silent thing, stayed in my dresser drawer beneath my scarves. Every night I'd open the drawer, stare at it for a few seconds, and close it again. It wasn't until the night the power went out, thunder shaking the old windows, lightning flashing across the family portraits, that I finally pulled it out again. I sat by candlelight, my hands steady now. The wax seal caught the light, glowing like a drop of blood, and I thought of his words, "For when it hurts most." I realized then that maybe the pain he meant wasn't about losing him. Maybe it was about realizing what my children had become. And that was the night I broke the seal. The wax cracked with a soft pop, like the past exhaling. For a moment, I just stared at it, that small, broken seal that once held back 30 years of memories. Inside was another folded sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges, and something else, an old brass key, worn smooth from decades of use. My breath caught. Charles had loved keys. He always said, "Every key is a promise, a door that waits for trust." The letter smelled faintly of cedar, and when I opened it, his handwriting flowed across the page like he'd written it yesterday. "My dearest Ellie, you always saw life for what it truly was. Not the money, not the titles, but the moments in between. I built Hayes Industries because I wanted our children to have more than I did. I didn't realize until it was too late that I might have given them too much of the wrong thing. I've hidden something that money cannot touch, something that belongs to you alone. The key you're holding opens a door that our children have never seen, but one day they will need it more than all the gold in their accounts. When the time feels right, go to the old farmhouse by the bay, the one where we spent our first summer after the wedding. You'll know what to do when you see it. With all my love, Charles." I read the letter twice, then again. The farmhouse by the bay, the one we sold 20 years ago. That little weather-beaten cottage where we used to cook over a fire and dance barefoot on the porch. It couldn't be. That place had been bought, rebuilt, resold, hadn't it? I held the key tighter. It was cold, heavy now, like it was remembering something I couldn't. Outside, thunder rolled over the sea cliffs. Inside, I felt something else rumbling. Not fear, not grief, but the first spark of curiosity. Maybe this wasn't a goodbye gift. Maybe it was a test. The next morning, I drove out to the coast. The road was long and winding, flanked by pines that swayed like old friends whispering gossip. The farther I drove, the quieter the world became. No traffic, no calls from Caroline asking for signatures, no news articles about Hayes Industries' expansion, just me and the hum of tires against old pavement. When I reached the bay, mist was rising off the water like breath. The cottage stood where it always had, smaller now, grayer, but still there. My heart kicked once hard in my chest. There was a for lease sign half tipped over in the yard, but the door looked new. The lock, I could tell, wasn't. I got out of the car, clutching the key in my fist. The wind off the ocean was sharp enough to taste salt. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, like it had been waiting all these years. The door creaked open to a room that smelled of dust, wood, and something faintly familiar. Lilac soap, maybe. The same kind I used when we were young. The house was empty except for one thing. A trunk in the middle of the floor. Old, iron-rimmed, with a small brass latch that matched my key exactly. I knelt beside it, the wood cold beneath my palms. Inside were three things: a leather journal, a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon, and a single manila folder stamped "Confidential, Hayes Industries." I didn't move for a long time. The ocean outside was calm, but inside me something wild was starting to stir. I opened the journal first. The first page was dated 1987. If something happens to me, Eleanor must know everything. The company isn't as clean as it looks. Some of the board members are hiding things: offshore accounts, illegal transfers. I've been collecting evidence quietly. I trust no one. Not even David yet. He's too young, too ambitious, but Eleanor, she'll know what to do. I froze. Evidence? Offshore accounts? I turned another page, then another. There were notes, signatures, names of people I'd seen in family photos, executives who'd sat at our dinner table laughing over wine. Charles had kept all of it, quietly, carefully for years, and now he'd left it with me. The letters beneath the journal were addressed to me, one for each of our children. He'd written them years apart, documenting their choices, their mistakes, their growth, as if he'd been watching them with both love and warning. I opened the one marked David. Son, if you're reading this, it means I've left the truth with your mother. You were always the clever one, the negotiator. But cleverness without conscience is a curse. Remember, there's no inheritance worth more than a name unsoiled. I covered my mouth. My husband, the man they thought had handed them everything, had built this final act to hand them something far greater. The manila folder, though, that was the one thing I hesitated to touch, because I knew once I opened it, everything would change. And change it did. Inside were documents, hundreds of them, account statements, wire transfers, proof of something I didn't yet understand. Some dated only a few months before his death. One file in particular was labeled Project Horizon. I read the first line and felt my knees weaken. Hayes Industries wasn't just a corporation anymore. It had been funding a private investment, one that Charles had secretly redirected. He'd moved millions, quietly, legally, into something called the Eleanor Foundation. I clutched the page so hard it wrinkled. He'd named it after me. When I got home, I sat in my car for almost an hour before I could go inside. The sea wind still lingered in my hair, and my hands smelled faintly of salt and dust. I put the key and the letters in a small wooden box by my bed. I couldn't tell anyone, not yet, not until I understood what all of it meant. But that night, for the first time since he died, I felt him there beside me. Not in the ghostly way that grief sometimes pretends, but in the real way, the way a man's love echoes through his actions. And I whispered into the dark, "Charles, what have you done?" The answer I knew was waiting in that folder, and I would open it, but not for revenge, for truth. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the kind of early where the world hasn't decided yet if it wants to be day. The house was still, the sky gray, and I could feel the storm of yesterday still whispering through my bones. The folder sat on the kitchen table exactly where I'd left it. It looked out of place, too official for my quiet kitchen with its chipped teapot and curtain that always caught the morning light. I sat down, took a long sip of black coffee, and untied the string that held the folder shut. Inside were statements, neatly filed, dated, and signed. My name was on several of them. Not as an investor, not as a donor, as a founder, the Eleanor Foundation. At first, I didn't believe it, but there it was. My name, embossed on documents that stretched back 10 years. Charles had been building it quietly, piece by piece, using portions of the company's profit and routing them into community funds, educational grants, medical clinics. The numbers weren't small. It wasn't some secret charity. It was enormous. He had taken nearly one-third of his personal shares, tens of millions, and transferred them into a trust under my name. For a while, I just stared at the papers. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a bird decided to try out its morning song, and it all felt too ordinary for something that would change everything. I pulled the next sheet, a mission statement typed in Charles's careful hand. The Eleanor Foundation exists to return what was taken, to rebuild what profit erased, to remind the company who it works for. There were signatures, the lawyer Martin Klein's name again, and a set of coordinates listed next to the phrase Property Holdings Bay Cottage Project. I smiled through my shock. "You clever man," I whispered. He hadn't just left me a key to an old house. He'd left me the cornerstone of a legacy that no one, not even our children, could touch. By noon, curiosity outweighed hesitation. I called the number printed at the bottom of the document. "The Eleanor Foundation offices. This is Lila speaking," a young woman answered. For a second, I didn't know what to say. I had to remind myself that this wasn't some stranger's charity. It was mine. "Hello, dear," I said softly. "This is Mrs. Eleanor Hayes." There was silence, then a small gasp. "Mrs. Hayes, ma'am, it's such an honor. We didn't know you'd call in person." "Neither did I said truthfully. She sounded nervous. "Would you like to schedule a visit to the office? Mr. Klein is here most days." My heart gave a small jump. "Martin Klein," I repeated. "Yes. Tell him I'll be there tomorrow morning." When I arrived the next day, I wasn't sure what to expect. I'd imagined something small, maybe an office above a bakery or a rented space with dusty chairs. But when I stepped into the lobby, my breath caught. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful. Open windows, soft light, framed photos on every wall of families, schools, clinics, and even veterans shelters. A quiet pride filled the air, the kind that didn't need to boast. The receptionist, the same Lila, stood immediately. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, almost flustered, "Mr. Klein said you might come." Before I could respond, a door opened down the hall. A tall, gray-haired man stepped out, adjusting his glasses. "Eleanor Hayes," he said warmly. "It's about time." "Martin," I breathed, smiling despite the emotion swelling in my chest. He shook my hand with both of his. "He told me you'd come one day. He said when Ellie's ready, she'll find the real inheritance." We sat in his office, the desk covered in folders and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. "I'm guessing you found the documents," he said. "I have," I said softly. "And the journal, the letters, the key." He nodded, eyes kind but sharp. "Your husband planned this foundation long before his health started failing. He didn't want the company swallowed by greed after he was gone, so he moved the heart of it here." He handed me another file. "This is everything the foundation has done, and everything it still controls." I opened it slowly. Inside was a list, not of profits, but of people. Children who'd gone to college on Hayes scholarships. Families whose mortgages had been saved by quiet donations. Communities rebuilt after storms with money that had quietly flowed through our company without anyone knowing. And then, near the bottom, something else. A second list. The Board of Hayes Industries. My children's names were there. Caroline, David, next to each, red markings. Notes, underlines, arrows. Martin leaned forward. "He knew they'd sell the company, Eleanor. He said it plainly. They'll see a dollar sign where I see a promise. But the foundation owns a single golden share. That share gives you final say over any sale that breaks the founder's covenant." "The founder's covenant?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "A clause in the original contract written by both of you decades ago. You remember those meetings, don't you? When he'd come home and read you every paragraph over dinner?" I laughed through a tear. I remember correcting his spelling. "Exactly," Martin said, eyes twinkling. "You wrote the very words that now give you authority. They're ironclad. You can stop any transaction, veto any sale, and override any majority vote if it violates company ethics." I sat back in my chair. "So all this time," I whispered, "I wasn't left with nothing." He shook his head. "No, Mrs. Hayes, you were left with everything that matters." That evening, I drove home in silence. The sky was streaked orange and gold, and for the first time since Charles's passing, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt ready. When I got home, I opened my phone and read the text messages waiting for me. "Mom, please don't stress about all these meetings. We're working on a merger. Huge opportunity. Trust us. David, you'll get your share, Mom. Promise." I set the phone down and smiled softly. "My dear," I said aloud, as if speaking to Charles, "they have no idea what's coming." The dusty envelope on my nightstand seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight, as if proud of itself. And I whispered to the quiet room, "You didn't give me less. You gave me power dressed in paper." The first calls came before sunrise, the way trouble likes to arrive, early, loud, and pretending it's urgent. I let the first three ring their way into the machine. The fourth was Martin. "Good morning," he said. "Two items. Alder's PR shop is seeding a story about aging interference. We won't dignify it, but we'll direct the narrative. Second, there's a leak from inside the company. Slides, selective numbers. It smells like panic, not plan." "I have tea, a pen, and a pie arriving," I said. "We'll be fine." He chuckled, gravel softening. "Ruth's blueberry? Is there another? Then yes, we're fine." I set the kettle down and watched the window take on that clean gray light that makes a day feel like a page. The phone chimed again. "Caroline," I answered. "Mother," she said, and the word came out like a sigh trying to be a trumpet. "There's a mess. The finance blog picked up a source. Comments are unkind." "Don't read them," I said. "They're not written for you. We need to respond." Her voice sharpened, the old steel rising. "We need to control the optics." "We'll tell the truth," I said. "It photographs well." A pause, then quieter. "I'm scared." "I know," I said. By 9, she was on my porch with a laptop and eyes that had learned a new color, humility edged in hurt. I opened the door and kissed her cheek anyway. Children need kissing on the worst days, same as the best. We sat at the kitchen table and did the thing mothers and daughters forget to do when everyone gets busy. We breathed at the same pace. When the kettle sighed, I poured 2 cups and slid the honey between us like a treaty. What if we made the wrong decision, then made another to hide it, then another? She asked, staring into the steam. You made a fast decision, I said. You forgot to ask a slower question. You're asking it now, she nodded. The leak. Fear, I said. Alder will dangle titles, salaries, escape hatches. Lizards shed skin when they feel trapped. So do frightened professionals. She laughed a little despite herself. You make it sound biological. Most cowardice is, I said, but courage is too. Her phone vibrated. She flipped it over by instinct, then stopped, laid it face down. A small, good moment. At 10, Janice and Luis arrived with folders and an alert kindness. Behind them, Ruth swept in carrying a pie like a sacrament and a stack of paper plates like common sense. Town hall first, Janice said without hello, which I appreciated. Employees at the downtown plant heard about the bid. Rumors say closure, outsourcing. They need to hear from leadership. Today. Louder rumor at the Mississippi land, Luis added. Line supervisors say Alder execs toured the site last month without announcing it. Workers felt sized. I looked at Caroline. She winced. We were told it was due diligence. Due comes with manners, I said. We'll go to both. And the press? Janice asked gently. We'll invite them, I said. They can stand in the same room as the people their headlines pretend to understand. Ruth cut the pie. Feed first, she said, then talk. Truth travels better on a full stomach. We ate with paper plates and forks that remembered church basements. The sugar steadied everyone's hands. Bored? I asked Luis. Rescheduling calls. One director is furious. 3 are relieved. 2 are counting math on their fingers. The secretary is in love with you. She'll get over it, I said. Let's drive. The downtown plant smelled like oil and honest sweat. The way it always has. The way a place smells when it knows how to make itself useful. Someone had wheeled a microphone onto the loading dock. Someone else had strung an extension cord across Hope. 100 faces turned when we walked in. Men and women with earplugs still resting like commas at their collars. I took the mic and did not raise my voice. Good morning, Hayes, I said. I won't waste your time. You've heard talk that we might sell the company. We will not. You've heard we might close this plant. We will not. If anyone tells you otherwise, they're confusing noise with news. A few heads tipped forward as if to say, go on. Here is what is true. We forgot our name at the top, I said. You did not forget it at the floor. We are correcting that. A hand went up in the front. Eddie's boy, now a foreman with his father's permanent squint. Why should we believe you? He asked. Fair. We've heard promises. Because I brought paper, I said, holding up the stewardship charter. It beats promises. Murmurs change shape. Paper is a familiar magic in a place where work orders still ride clipboards. We're creating a covenant, I went on, between the company and its people. It includes a moratorium on closures without an employee vote, transparent financials for this plant, and a fund, 5% of net profits for education, emergency help, and community grants, administered by a committee with a seat for one of you. Voting for that seat starts next week. A woman near the back, hairnet, eyes like she had run out of patience in 2003, called out, and when the money gets tight? Then leadership gets tighter faster, I said. Bonuses stop before paychecks do. We shrink advertising before we shrink lunches. We cut travel before we cut hours. And if anyone says the market disagrees, tell them your chair said the market can sit down. Laughter. Not the mean kind, the tired kind turning into the brave kind. I looked at the cluster of reporters huddled by the pallets, pens poised like they had permission. Write this down, I told them. Layoffs aren't efficiencies, they're funerals. If we have one, we'll do it like one. Quiet, decent, expensive to the right people first. That got quiet. It also got written. Afterward, we moved among the crowd. Hands, eyes, the quick exchange of names that make a room less afraid. Janice took notes. Like minutes matter. Luis listened like a therapist who knew the billing code for grief. Ruth passed what was left of the pie to a man who looked like he hadn't had breakfast, then boxed the crumbs as if crumbs were also a kind of promise. We drove south in a convoy, Mississippi land next. Pines, then open sky, then the long flat where the company's newest bones lay ready for muscles we hadn't built yet. Someone had set up folding chairs under a tent. Someone had assumed a ribbon would be cut soon. Not today. Supervisors gathered, arms crossed. A few wore expressions that said they'd already taken other calls. I could smell Alder's cologne on the last breeze. Before you ask, I said, stepping under the tent, I know you were toured without respect. I'm here for an apology and a plan. The word apology softened 3 mouths at once. I gave it. Publicly. Specifically. No one walks your land without asking you to walk first. I said, that's our new law. Then the plan. We will build here, I said. Slower, smarter, with training that happens before the machines arrive, not after. You'll help design it. If you want a fancy title for that, fine. I like expert better. A young engineer with nervous hands raised one. Why keep it at all? The numbers. He trailed off, glancing at the reporter pretending to be a plant. Because purpose outruns the quarter, I said. This site is a promise to a town that already bought more Hayes lunch pails than Wall Street ever will. We're staying. He looked down and smiled like maybe that was the first good thing he'd heard at work in weeks. Before we left, I asked to see the new hires class. 20 faces under fluorescent lights, the universal expression of people who haven't yet decided if they belong. I told them the story of the founder's letter. I showed them the sentence where we'd promised never to sell what we wouldn't buy back with our name. I asked them to hold us to it. Ma'am, one of them said shyly, are you the boss? I'm the steward, I said. It's more work and less power than it sounds. He grinned. That's the good kind. On the drive home, my phone vibrated with texts like pebbles thrown at a window you already planned to open. Press wants a quote. 2 lines. Union rep said your line about funerals made him cry. In a good way. We're getting dozens of internal emails. Relief, skepticism, offers to help. It's a start. Caroline sent a photo. Her kitchen table, her kids doing homework, a takeout pizza in the center like a truce. Telling them tonight, we almost sold and didn't. We'll call you after. A second later, thank you, Mom. I pulled into my driveway at dusk. The house did its old thing, lamp coming on like an eyelid, floorboard greeting me with its long-time complaint. I set the charter on the mantel, beside the photo of Charles laughing at something the camera never learned. The phone rang. I let the machine catch it. A smooth voice slid out of the speaker. Mrs. Hayes, this is Anthony Page from Alder Capital. We believe your veto misreads shareholder value. We are prepared to improve our offer and provide your family with options. If you reconsider, we can make all this noise disappear. I pressed the button and answered into the room, knowing he couldn't hear and also knowing rooms tell the truth back to you when you need it. Hello, Mr. Page, I said to the empty air. I'm not trying to make the noise disappear. I'm trying to make the music louder. I called Martin. They'll sweeten, I said. They'll also sour, he replied. They'll stir. Expect a concerned investor's letter by morning. Let 'em write, I said. We'll host them. In public. He exhaled a pleased sound. Town hall with investors? Same room as employees, I said. Same donuts. If their stomach turns at that, they're not our kind. The letter came at 6:13 a.m., 15 signatures, 2 of which had once toasted our anniversaries. Words like fiduciary duty and entrenchment strutted across my screen. A blog posted a photo of me under the headline, Widow Wields Veto. Another called me the grandmother who stopped a billion. I made oatmeal and did not read the comments. Then I wrote 2 lines for the press, just like Martin asked. Hayes Industries is not for sale. We are recommitting to the promise we made when we had nothing to sell. People first, profit faithful to purpose. We sent it to everyone who'd asked and several who hadn't. Then we posted an invitation, open forum, employees, community, and shareholders, Friday 6 p.m. downtown plant. Ruth added, pie will be served. We left it in. By noon, the RSVP list looked like a census. Union reps, pastors, 2 high school principals, the banker who knows every mortgage by middle name. Bloggers and beat reporters, sure, but also Mrs. Greeley from the post office who has sorted our town's hope for 30 years, and Eddie's widow in her good pink sweater. I stood at the stove stirring soup and felt something ancient and communal tilt toward yes. At 5:30, I walked into the plant again. The floor had been swept twice, folding chairs in rows like a revival, a portable speaker that would misbehave once and then work perfectly. In the corner, a table of coffee, Ruth's pies, and a tray of donuts that made the teenagers in the back put their phones down for a full minute. I took the mic, thanked everyone, and did what this town had always taught me to do. I told a story before I asked for anything. I told them about the day Charles and I wrote the founder's letter at our kitchen table, a baby asleep in a laundry basket because cradles were a luxury and laundry wasn't. I told them about the leaky roof we fixed for the rental family before we could afford to, because rain finds the same people over and over if you let it. I told them that a company is a promise you make to strangers and then keep until they're not strangers anymore. Then I said the new part. There is money on the table, I said, more than we've ever seen at once. If this were only about arithmetic, we would be done. But it's about names, and names are algebra. They stand for something you have to solve. A hand rose near the front, an investor I recognized from 3 holiday parties and 1 awkward fundraiser. "What about our returns?" he asked, not rudely. We believed in this company. "You will still have returns," I said. "They will be slower and steadier. They will be the kind you can stand on, not the kind that vanish in a quarter and leave your shoes wet." A reporter asked about my veto. I held up the charter. "Paper," I said again. "Law and love braided. My husband left it because he'd seen men sell a shoreline and then pretend the ocean moved. We're not moving." A young mother stood, baby on hip. "My husband works nights at the plant," she said. "He thinks he'll be replaced by a machine in 3 years." "Machines will come," I said. "So will training, so will raises, so will a seat on the committee that chooses both. Bring your husband to the training design session Tuesday. We'll put his knowledge in the blueprint, not just his back." Applause, not for me, for the idea that backs deserve blueprints. An older man in the second row lifted his chin. The banker. "If the company slows growth, the town slows too," he said. "We'll need patience." "Good," I said. "Patience is a local currency. We mint it better than Wall Street does." Laughter, relief, resistance too, but the kind that knows its days are numbered when neighbors start nodding together. At the end, I asked everyone to stand if Hayes had paid their wage at least once in their life. Current or past, Christmas temp or summer job, contractor or clerk. More than half the room rose. The air changed. We were not debating a transaction. We were renewing a vow. I closed with a sentence I hadn't planned, the kind that shows up when you've been honest for long enough to be surprised by your own mouth. "Legacy isn't cash you scatter," I said. "It's a table you keep setting. We're keeping ours." Afterward, people stayed. They always do when they feel invited to the story instead of reported on. Investors and line workers poured coffee for each other. Reporters ran out of adjectives and put their pens down to eat pie. I watched Caroline move through the room, listening more than she spoke, fingers not once reaching for her phone. I watched David crouch to talk to a teenager about apprenticeships and saw his shoulders become the ones his father used to carry. When the room finally exhaled itself empty, we stacked chairs together, directors, janitors, me. The plant smelled like sugar and machine oil and something I hadn't smelled in a long time, shared relief. Outside, night had laid itself over the river like a blanket. The moon made itself useful on the water. Caroline slid her arm through mine and walked me to the car. "You were good," she said, and the hesitation was just humility trying not to trip. I didn't know a no could sound like that. "A good no frees a better yes," I said. "We said yes to who we are." She nodded, then smiled at something inside her. "The kids asked what legacy means. I told them it's the stories our name tells when we're not in the room." "And what did they say?" "They asked if pie counts." "It always has," I said. At home, I put the mic notes in my drawer with the golden share and Charles's letter. I added a new page to my notebook. "Backlash is wind. Trim the sails. Keep the shore." The house settled. My knees ached the way Ruth says they do when the sky has given everything it can. I lay down and let tiredness put its hand on my forehead. Somewhere in the part of sleep where memory and meaning share a blanket, I felt Charles tuck the covers and say it again, his favorite benediction, "Steady winds, Ellie. Steady winds." And for the first time since the will reading, I believed the sun would still be up in the morning because we had decided to deserve it. The morning after the town hall, my kitchen smelled like applause and cinnamon. People had dropped off pies, cards, and one handwritten thank you note from the factory floor, signed by 37 names I could barely read through the tears. Gratitude always arrives like that, messy, humble, and more powerful than polished words. But between all those notes sat one envelope that wasn't friendly. My name was typed on it, not written. I didn't have to open it to know it was from Alder's lawyers. Inside was a letter, sharp as a blade. Mrs. Hayes, your interference in the sale of Hayes Industries has caused substantial losses to shareholders. Unless you rescind your veto within 7 days, we will pursue legal remedy for breach of fiduciary duty. 7 days. They thought I would break in a week. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in the same drawer as Charles's notes, and smiled. You chose the wrong grandmother, I whispered. At 10 sharp, Martin arrived with his briefcase and his old half-broken umbrella. They're bluffing, he said. They know the charter is airtight, but they'll throw everything at you to see if you'll blink. I don't blink, I said. I teach others how not to. He grinned. Then we fight softly and smartly. We'll issue a statement. I'll handle the legal side. You handle the moral one. That afternoon, Caroline came over, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no perfume, just honesty. Mom, I didn't know they'd go this far, she said. They're threatening to freeze our personal accounts. Then let them try, I said. Money is their god. Mine's still upstairs in the attic, waiting in that box your father built. She frowned. The one with the journals? The same one, I said. He didn't just leave us proof. He left us protection. We climbed up together, dust swirling like memory. I pulled the box forward and lifted out the last envelope, one I hadn't opened yet. Charles had written only 2 words on it, for later. Caroline watched me tear it open. Inside was a simple document, an addendum to his will. It stated that the Eleanor Foundation was the controlling shareholder of Hayes Industries Trust assets, not me personally. In other words, they couldn't sue me without suing the foundation that now funded hundreds of families, schools, and hospitals. Charles had built me a fortress disguised as paper. Caroline's eyes filled. He knew this would happen, didn't he? I nodded. He knew them better than they knew themselves. We called a press conference for the next morning. The reporters were hungry for scandal, but I fed them something better. I'm not fighting my children, I said calmly into the microphones. I'm fighting forgetfulness. A company is like a family. It fails not because it's poor, but because it forgets why it was rich in the first place. They asked about the lawsuit threats. I smiled. You can't sue someone for remembering their promise. That line made headlines by evening. By nightfall, investors started calling Martin to clarify positions. By dawn, 2 of Alder's partners had pulled out, citing ethical misalignment. When fear meets conviction, it always folds first. But not everyone folded. That evening, I found David waiting in my driveway. He leaned against his car, hands in pockets, eyes restless. The last time I saw him like that, he was 12 and caught smoking behind the barn. Guilt has a way of aging, but it never grows up. Mom, he said, you've turned the board against us. Caroline won't admit it, but she's scared. Good, I said. Fear is a fine teacher if you let it finish the lesson. He looked away. You've got no idea how much is on the line. I know exactly how much, I said softly. 30 million in the bank, and one mother's love being weighed against it. He flinched. You think this is about greed? I think it's about grief, I said. You lost your father and you thought replacing him with power would make the silence quieter. It won't. For a moment his mouth opened, then closed again. He kicked a stone off the driveway, hands shaking. I didn't want to lose everything he built. Then learn to build like him, I said. Not just for yourself, but for someone you'll never meet. He looked at me, eyes wet. And if I don't know how? I smiled and handed him the key, the same brass key that had opened the cottage by the bay. Start here. Go see what love built before money tried to buy it. He turned the key over in his hand, confused. Why? Because it's time you met the man you think you already understood. That night, when the house fell quiet again, I opened my notebook. I wrote one last message to myself. When the next storm comes, remember, truth doesn't shout, it stands. And when it stands long enough, even thunder begins to listen. The phone buzzed, a message from Caroline. Mom, I read Dad's journal. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Please don't hate us. We're trying. I typed back, I never stopped loving you. I just needed to remind you what love costs. Then I put the phone down, looked at Charles's picture, and whispered, It's working, love. They're waking up. The morning came slow, like it knew the story was ending and didn't want to rush. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table, touching every scar on its wooden surface. The burn mark from David's science project, the knife scratch from Caroline learning to cook, the ink stain from Charles's endless paperwork. This table had held 40 years of our lives and was about to hold the last chapter. There was a knock at the door. I knew who it was before I opened it. David stood there, hair tousled, eyes soft. Behind him was Caroline, holding something small wrapped in a faded handkerchief. "We went to the cottage," she said quietly. I smiled. David took a breath, voice unsteady. "Mom, I opened the old trunk in the bedroom. There was another letter, for us." He held it out, hands trembling slightly. I took it gently, feeling the texture of the paper. The same cream-colored stock Charles had always used. My name wasn't on this one. Only 2 words written in his handwriting, "For the children." "Read it," I said softly. Caroline unfolded the letter, her fingers brushing the creases like prayer beads. Her voice cracked as she began. "My dear children, if you're reading this, your mother has already shown you what real wealth is. You grew up thinking I built a company. I didn't. I built a promise. And a promise needs guardians, not heirs. I gave you money so you could live. I gave your mother wisdom so you could learn. If you ever lose sight of what matters, go home. Not to the big house, but to the small cottage by the sea. That's where I learned what forever means. Love is the only inheritance that doesn't depreciate. Take care of your mother. Listen more than you speak, and remember, she's not what's left behind. She's what keeps everything standing." By the time Caroline finished, her tears had left spots on the ink. David was staring at the floor, his voice barely a whisper. He knew everything, every mistake, every choice we'd make. "Yes," I said, smiling through my own tears. "And he still loved you anyway. That's what makes a father's love different from success. It doesn't require you to win to deserve it." Caroline reached across the table, taking my hand. "Mom, we want to fix things, the board, the company, all of it. But we want to do it with you, the way Dad would have wanted." I felt Charles's presence in that moment, warm and proud, like sunlight resting on old wood. "Then start by remembering what he built it for," I said. "Not for power, for people." Over the next weeks, the noise died down. Alder's threats faded like a bad dream after dawn. Investors stayed, not all, but enough. And the foundation grew. We opened a new community clinic in the Old West District, the first to bear the name Hayes Health Center. The ribbon cutting felt like a reunion of everyone who'd ever believed in something simple, that decency pays its own dividends. At the ceremony, Caroline gave the speech. She stood straight, confident, but softer now. "This center," she said, "is more than a project. It's our apology turned into purpose. It's proof that legacies can heal if we let love lead again." The crowd clapped, and somewhere between the applause, I felt peace settle over me like an old shawl. Familiar, comforting, complete. Later that night, back at home, I brewed tea and sat on the porch as the wind carried the sound of distant waves. The stars were clear, sharp little memories pinned against the dark. I opened my notebook and wrote my final entry. Charles built the company. I built the home. Together, we built a promise. The money came and went, but the love stayed. If you ever wonder what wealth looks like, it looks like forgiveness. It sounds like family laughter returning to the same table. And it feels like peace after a long storm. I closed the book, smiled to the sky, and whispered, "We did it, love, you can rest now." The wind answered, soft, steady, almost like a hand brushing against my cheek. Then I looked at the dusty envelope one last time, the one that had started it all. It was empty now, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Because that's the thing about love. It never really ends. It just changes shape. And as I turned off the porch light and stepped inside, I knew the story wasn't about losing $30 million. It was about gaining everything that money could never buy.